Jack Turner, a former Army Ranger living alone in the frozen depths of White Pine National Forest, was checking old trail markers as the first heavy snow began to fall. It should have been another silent winter morning until his German Shepherd, Ranger, stopped cold, ears locked forward, then sprinted into the trees without a sound. Jack followed and found a woman trapped in a steel animal snare, blood staining the snow, her breath shaking as she tried to explain why she was there. But nothing about her gear or her fear fit the story she told. As the forest closed in and the storm erased their tracks, Jack understood one thing clearly: the trap wasn't the real danger. Someone else was already moving in these woods. Please support the channel by subscribing. Winter had settled heavily over White Pine National Forest, a vast wilderness of frozen pines and muted skies where snow fell not gently but with purpose, sealing the world beneath a white silence that swallowed sound, memory, and time itself. Jack Turner stood knee-deep in snow near the edge of a narrow clearing, his boots planted with the careful balance of a man who had learned long ago how quickly the ground could betray you. At 42, Jack was tall and broad-shouldered, built not like a bodybuilder, but like a man shaped by years of endurance, long marches, heavy packs, sleepless nights. His dark brown hair, once kept regulation short, had grown uneven and wind-tossed, threaded now with early streaks of gray he neither noticed nor cared to trim. A rough beard framed a jaw cut sharp by discipline and sorrow, the kind of face people trusted instinctively yet rarely approached. His eyes were steel blue, the color of winter rivers, alert even in stillness, always measuring distance, movement, threat. He wore the same weathered brown canvas coat he had owned for years, its seams patched by hand, a red and black plaid flannel visible beneath when the wind lifted the hem. The coat carried the smell of wood smoke, cold iron, and pine sap scents that clung to him as stubbornly as the past. Jack lived alone by choice, or so he told himself, in a single-room log cabin set miles from the nearest plowed road. He spoke little to people, less to towns, and almost never about the years he had spent overseas as an Army Ranger. Combat had not broken him. Loss had. The ambush that killed 3 men under his command, including his closest friend, had hollowed something inside him, leaving behind a quiet vigilance that never slept. Beside him moved Ranger. The German Shepherd was 5 years old, large even for his breed, his frame powerful without heaviness, muscles shifting smoothly beneath a thick coat of black and tan fur, dusted now with snow. His muzzle had begun to gray slightly, giving him a thoughtful, almost solemn expression, but his amber eyes were sharp and alive, constantly scanning the forest. Ranger had been labeled too reactive at the shelter, a dog returned twice for growling at strangers, but Jack had seen past that, recognizing a familiar edge, an animal wired to protect, to assess before trusting. Between them existed a bond built not on commands shouted or praise lavished, but on shared silence and mutual respect. Ranger did not obey Jack. He worked with him. That morning, Jack was following a line of old game trails, checking for illegal traps. He hated traps, not because hunting itself offended him, but because steel jaws set without care maimed more than they killed, leaving animals to suffer unseen. Over the past month, he had found several disturbed patches of snow, signs that someone had been testing the forest again, probing its boundaries. Each discovery tightened the coil of unease in his chest. White Pine was protected land. No one was supposed to be setting traps here. Ranger was trotting a few steps ahead when it happened. The dog stopped so abruptly that snow sprayed forward from his paws. His ears snapped upright, rigid as spears, his body lowering into a tense crouch. Jack noticed immediately. Ranger never froze without reason. "What is it, boy?" Jack murmured, his voice low, calm, though his hand had already drifted toward the knife at his belt. Ranger did not answer with a bark. Instead, he released a single deep breath through his nose and bolted into the trees, moving fast and silent, a gray-black shadow cutting through white. Jack swore under his breath and followed, pushing through branches that clawed at his coat, his breath burning in his lungs. The forest thickened quickly. the kind of dense growth where sound distorted and distance lied. Wind surged through the treetops, shaking loose curtains of snow that hissed as they fell. Jack was about to call Ranger back when he heard it, a sound so wrong it stopped him mid-step. A cry. It was faint, broken, torn apart by wind, but unmistakably human. Pain lived in that sound, sharp and desperate, nothing like the calls of injured animals Jack had learned to identify over years in the woods. His heart kicked hard against his ribs, and for a brief, unwelcome moment, memory surged voices on the radio, shouting, then silence. He forced himself back into the present and ran. Ranger skidded to a stop at the edge of a small ravine. Jack reached him seconds later and followed the dog's gaze downward. There, half buried in snow and shadow, was a woman. She lay on her side, one leg twisted unnaturally, her boot clamped inside a steel trap whose jaws were sunk cruelly into her ankle. The metal was new, unweathered, its chain anchored deep into the frozen ground. Blood stained the snow beneath her in dark, alarming patches. The woman, Sarah Mitchell, looked to be in her mid-30s. She was of average height, with a lean, athletic build that suggested she was used to moving outdoors, though now her body trembled uncontrollably from pain and cold. Her skin was pale beneath a wind-reddened flush, freckles standing out across her nose and cheeks. Strands of auburn hair had slipped loose from a tight braid, sticking to her damp face with frost. Her eyes were green, wide and glassy, and when they found Jack, relief flickered through them, quickly followed by fear, as if she expected him to vanish like a mirage. "Please," she whispered hoarsely. Her lips were cracked and blue-tinged. "Please don't go." "I'm not going anywhere," Jack said, kneeling carefully beside her. His voice was steady, the same tone he had used on wounded soldiers years ago. Inside, anger flared hot, focused. Someone had done this. Ranger circled Sarah once, sniffing the air, then pressed close to her uninjured side, lowering his body to share warmth. The dog's presence seemed to ground her. Her breathing slowed slightly as her shaking hands clutched at the sleeve of Jack's coat. Jack examined the trap with practiced eyes. Heavy-gauge steel. Illegal. Recently set. His jaw tightened. "Did you step on it?" She nodded weakly. "I didn't see it. I heard something moving. I thought it was an animal." Her voice cracked and tears froze on her lashes. "Any other injuries?" "My ankle," she gasped. "And I can't feel my toes." That worried him more than the blood. And no one left a trap like this without intention. As he worked to assess the damage, the forest seemed to close in around them, wind howling through the ravine like a warning. Jack felt the old instinct settle into place, the one that told him danger rarely came alone. Somewhere beyond the trees, something had brought Sarah Mitchell into his forest, and something else had left her here to bleed. Ranger lifted his head and growled softly, not at Sarah, but at the woods beyond, as if sensing what Jack already knew. This rescue was only the beginning. Jack knelt beside the woman as the wind pressed harder against the ravine walls, driving needles of snow into every exposed seam of his coat, and only then did he fully see the cruelty of what held her there. The steel trap was not old or rusted, as many illegal ones were, but clean, recently oiled, its serrated jaws sunk into the thick leather of her boot and deep into the flesh beneath, clamped with mechanical patience as if it could wait forever for the life inside her leg to give up. Jack's breath slowed, his face hardening into the same unreadable mask he had worn on frozen nights overseas, when panic was more dangerous than bullets. Ranger stood close, his broad chest pressed lightly against the woman's side, sharing warmth. His amber eyes flicking from the trap to the surrounding trees, the fur along his spine lifting in a low, warning ripple. "Emily," the woman said when Jack asked her name again, her voice thin but steadier than before. "Emily Brooks." She swallowed, pain tightening her throat. Up close, she looked to be in her mid-30s, maybe 36 or 37. tall and lean with long limbs made for walking rough ground rather than city sidewalks. Her auburn hair, thick and slightly wavy, had been braided tight down her back, though loose strands framed her face now, stiff with frost. Her skin was pale beneath the cold, dotted with faint freckles that suggested long days outdoors in warmer seasons, and her hands, though shaking, were calloused in a way Jack noticed immediately. Not a tourist's hands, not someone who spent most of her life behind a desk. Her eyes were green and sharp even through pain, the kind of eyes that observed first and reacted later, and when they met his, there was fear there, yes, but also calculation, as if she were measuring him just as carefully as he measured her. "How long?" Jack asked, already unbuckling his pack. "An hour," Emily said, then shook her head weakly. "Maybe more." "I lost track." She sucked in a breath as another gust rocked her. "I tried to pry it open. I shouldn't have. It just bit harder." Jack nodded once. That much was true. He could see where the trap had chewed deeper with every desperate movement, the metal teeth merciless, designed to punish resistance. His jaw tightened. Traps like this weren't set to kill cleanly. They were set to hold, to let fear and pain do the rest. Ranger lowered his head and nudged Emily's shoulder gently, then went still again, ears swiveling. The dog was 5 years old now, his muzzle dusted with gray, his body powerful and controlled, and Jack trusted his instincts without question. If Ranger was uneasy, there was a reason. "Emily," Jack said, keeping his voice even, "I'm going to open it. When I do, it's going to hurt worse for a moment. I need you to stay still." She nodded, jaw clenched, pride flaring through the pain. "I can handle it." Jack pulled out a compact pry bar and a pair of locking pliers from his pack, tools he carried not out of habit but necessity. Living this far from help meant you learned to fix what broke or bleed out waiting. He positioned the pry bar carefully between the jaws, braced his weight, and applied steady pressure, muscles in his forearms standing out beneath his sleeves. The trap resisted, then grudgingly shifted, with a metallic groan that echoed too loudly in the ravine. Emily cried out despite herself. A raw sound ripped from deep in her chest, her fingers clawing into the snow. Ranger pressed closer, his warmth a solid presence, his growl deepening, not at her, but at the pain itself, as if he could drive it away by force of will. "Almost," Jack muttered, sweat breaking cold on his temples. With one final controlled shove, the jaws sprang apart. Jack kicked the trap away hard, sending it skidding across the ice until it slammed against a rock and stopped. Emily collapsed back, gasping, tears freezing on her lashes as relief and agony tangled together. Jack moved immediately, cutting away the boot, exposing a mangled ankle already swelling grotesquely, the skin torn and bruised deep purple. He worked fast, methodical, wrapping the wound, splinting the joint with practiced efficiency. As he did, he noticed more details that unsettled him. The quality of her gear, the reinforced seams of her pants, the expensive thermal layers beneath. Not what someone wore on a casual hike. "What were you doing out here?" he asked, not accusing, just asking. Emily hesitated, her breath fogging the air. "Survey work," she said finally. "Environmental." Jack did not look up. "That's a broad word." She managed a thin smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "It covers a lot." He finished securing the splint and leaned back on his heels, studying her face. There was intelligence there, and stubbornness, and something guarded. He recognized it because he saw the same thing in his own reflection some mornings. People who learned early that trust was expensive. Ranger sniffed the discarded trap again, then lifted his head sharply, staring into the trees. His ears pinned back, and a low rumble vibrated in his chest. Jack followed his gaze. The forest was too quiet. Snow still fell, but the wind had shifted, carrying with it a faint scent Jack didn't like. Oil and cold metal. Human. Recent. "Someone set this," Jack said quietly, "and they didn't do it weeks ago." Emily's eyes flickered. "You're sure?" "I am." He met her gaze fully now. which means you didn't just wander into bad luck." Her face tightened, and for a moment she looked like she might argue. Instead, she looked away, staring at the pale sky between branches. "I didn't know about the traps," she said. "I swear." Jack believed she believed that. Whether it was the truth was another matter. He shifted his weight and glanced toward the slope leading out of the ravine. The snow was thickening fast, the storm closing in like a held breath about to be released. They couldn't stay here. "Can you stand?" Emily tried, teeth clenched, and failed, her body sagging back with a sharp hiss of pain. Jack nodded once, already deciding. He crouched, sliding one arm under her knees and the other behind her back. She stiffened in surprise, then relaxed slightly when she realized he wasn't going to drop her. He was stronger than he looked at first glance, strength built from necessity rather than show, and he lifted her with careful ease. Ranger moved ahead instinctively, positioning himself to break trail, his body cutting a path through drifts, stopping every few steps to look back and check their pace. The dog's discipline wasn't trained, it was learned through living with a man who survived by awareness. As they climbed out of the ravine, Emily pressed her face briefly against Jack's shoulder, not for warmth, but because the world tilted and spun, and she needed something solid. He felt the tremor run through her and adjusted his grip without comment. He had carried wounded men heavier than her across worse ground. What made this different was the silence. No radio chatter, no extraction coming, just snow and trees and a stranger bleeding in his arms. Halfway up, Jack spotted more signs, faint boot prints half buried by snowfall, leading not toward the main trail, but deeper into protected land. Someone had been moving through here deliberately, testing routes. His stomach tightened. When they reached level ground, Jack paused, breathing hard, scanning the forest. Ranger stood rigid, ears high, his tail still. The dog sensed it too. This was not a random accident. Emily noticed the change in Jack's posture. "What is it?" "Nothing good," he said honestly. He started moving again, angling toward his cabin, still miles away, but the only shelter within reach. Behind them, the ravine swallowed their tracks as snow fell heavier, erasing evidence with indifferent efficiency. The trap lay abandoned where Jack had kicked it, jaws gaping uselessly, waiting for no one now, but the intention behind it still lingered, sharp and unresolved in the cold air. By the time the cabin lights finally appeared faintly through the trees, Emily's head had lolled against Jack's chest, her consciousness drifting in and out. Ranger stayed close, brushing against her leg whenever he could, as if reminding her to stay. Jack felt the weight of responsibility settle fully onto his shoulders. He had pulled her from the trap, but whatever had placed it there had not yet shown its face. And Jack Turner had learned the hard way that the most dangerous part of any mission was never the first contact. It was what came after, when you thought the worst was over. The storm announced itself long before it fully arrived, first as a pressure change that made Jack's ears ring faintly, then as a low, distant roar rolling down from the higher ridges like something alive and impatient. Snow began to fall harder, thicker, the flakes larger and wetter, clinging to eyelashes and fabric, blurring the forest into a shifting white maze. Jack adjusted Emily's weight in his arms, feeling the subtle tremor that ran through her body despite her efforts to stay still, and set his jaw. Time had narrowed to a single purpose: get her out alive before the mountain decided otherwise. Emily Brooks drifted in and out of awareness, her cheek pressed against Jack's shoulder, the rough canvas of his coat scraping faintly against her skin. Up close, her scent was a mix of cold metal, pine resin, and something cleaner soap, expensive and unfamiliar in a place like this. Her frame was lighter than Jack had expected for a woman of her height, long-limbed and spare, muscle-toned but not bulky, the build of someone accustomed to movement rather than comfort. When her eyes opened, they tracked the passing trees with quiet intensity, even through pain, absorbing details unconsciously. She wasn't panicking. That, Jack noted, was not normal. Ranger moved ahead of them, his powerful shoulders rolling smoothly as he broke trail through knee-deep snow, stopping every few yards to look back. The German shepherd's coat was now frosted white along his back, but his movements remained precise, economical. His tail stayed low, not wagging, not stiff-working mode. He had been trained once, long ago, before the shelter, before Jack. But whatever formal commands he had learned had been replaced by something deeper. Pattern recognition, shared instinct. Ranger sensed the storm, the way sailors sensed shifting seas. Jack angled away from the main trail deliberately. The obvious path was also the most exposed, a shallow corridor where wind funneled hard and drifts piled fast. Instead, he chose a longer route that hugged the tree line, using the thick trunks as partial shelter. His breath came measured, controlled, each step placed with care despite the uneven ground. The years as a ranger had left him with a strange calm in moments like this. Fear existed, yes, but it had been catalogued and shelved, accessible only if useful. Emily stirred again. "You don't have to carry me like this," she murmured, her voice hoarse but lucid. "I can—" "No," Jack said, firm but not unkind. "You can't." She let out a quiet, humorless huff of a laugh that fogged the air. "You don't waste words." He didn't answer. He rarely did when silence worked better. Minutes stretched, distorted by cold and effort. The snow thickened into near whiteout conditions, visibility shrinking to a few yards at best. Jack felt the first sting of fatigue in his shoulders, but ignored it. What concerned him more was the way Emily's breathing changed, shallow one moment, too slow the next. Hypothermia was a patient enemy. "Emily," he said, pitching his voice low and steady, "stay with me. Talk." She hesitated, then nodded weakly. "You want to know why I'm here?" she said. "I do." "I'm an environmental researcher," she replied. "Field-based, not academic." The words were chosen carefully. "I track animal movement, human impact." Jack adjusted his grip slightly. "That equipment you're carrying is expensive." "Yes." "And your boots are new." "Yes." This time there was a pause. "They were issued." "Issued by who?" Emily's eyes slid shut. "By the organization I work for." That wasn't an answer, and they both knew it. Jack didn't push. Pushing people too hard, too fast, made them retreat. He'd learned that the hard way, with men under his command and with himself. The ground sloped downward again, then leveled. Jack felt relief stir faintly. They were getting closer. Ranger slowed, ears flicking back toward them, then forward again, sensing something ahead. The cabin emerged gradually from the snowfall, first as a darker shape among trees, then as the solid outline of a low, sturdy structure crouched against the storm. Built of thick logs, its roof steeply pitched to shed snow, it looked less like a home and more like an extension of the land itself. A thin line of smoke curled from the chimney, quickly torn apart by the wind. Emily's eyes opened wider when she saw it. "You live here?" "Yes." "Alone?" "With Ranger." The dog glanced back at the sound of his name, ears twitching, then continued forward. Jack reached the porch and carefully shifted Emily's weight to open the door. The cabin greeted them with a wave of heat and the scent of burning pine, a stark contrast to the violence outside. He stepped inside and shut the door with his heel, sealing out the storm in one decisive motion. The sudden quiet was almost disorienting. Inside, the space was simple but meticulously ordered. A cast-iron stove glowed at the far end, its warmth radiating outward. A heavy wooden table bore the marks of years of use, its surface scarred and honest. Shelves lined the walls, filled with practical items, canned food, tools, neatly stacked books on forestry, survival, and old military manuals. There were no photographs visible, no decorations meant to soften the place. Jack laid Emily down gently on a narrow couch near the stove, propping her injured leg carefully on a folded blanket. He shrugged off his coat and moved with efficient purpose, adding wood to the fire, setting a pot of water to heat. Ranger shook himself violently, sending snow flying, then padded over to Emily and lay down at her feet, his body forming a living barrier between her and the door. Emily watched everything with quiet focus. Now that the immediate danger had passed, her features relaxed slightly, revealing lines of strain around her eyes and mouth that spoke of someone older than her years. Her auburn hair, freed from the braid, fell around her shoulders in loose waves, catching the firelight. Her skin, though pale, was unmarked by vanity. No makeup, no artifice. She looked like a woman who valued function over appearance. "Thank you," she said finally. The words were simple, but the weight behind them was not. Jack nodded once, kneeling to check the splint again. The swelling had worsened, angry and pronounced, but the bleeding had slowed. "You did the right thing staying still," he said. "Another hour out there." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. She swallowed. Someone could have died. Jack looked up at her sharply. Someone almost did. Their eyes held for a long moment. Emily's gaze dropped first. He moved to her pack next, unzipping it without apology. If she objected, she didn't show it. Inside, he found exactly what he had expected and more: high-grade GPS equipment, laminated maps marked with color-coded symbols, a satellite communicator wrapped carefully in insulation, tools meant for planning, not wandering. "You're not lost," Jack said quietly. Emily closed her eyes. When she opened them again, something had shifted in her expression, a subtle collapse of the guard she'd been holding. "No," she admitted. "I'm not." Ranger lifted his head at the change in her voice, amber eyes fixed on her face, assessing. He did not growl. He did not retreat. He simply watched. Outside, the storm howled, battering the cabin walls, but inside, the moment stretched in a fragile pocket of warmth and truth. Whatever Emily Brooks had come to White Pine for, it was bigger than an accident, and Jack Turner felt the old, familiar pull of responsibility tighten around his chest. He had saved her from the trap and the cold. What he hadn't yet decided was whether saving her would end up costing him something far greater. The cabin settled into the storm like an old animal bracing against the cold, its logs creaking softly as the wind pressed and withdrew again, a slow breath taken by the mountain itself. Inside, the fire burned steady and bright, casting long amber shadows across the walls, shadows that seemed to move even when nothing else did. Jack Turner sat on a low stool near the stove, sleeves rolled up, hands methodical, as he reheated water and prepared fresh bandages, while his mind worked on a far more dangerous task than first aid: weighing truth. Emily Brooks lay on the narrow couch, her injured leg elevated, the makeshift splint holding firm. Pain had carved sharp lines around her mouth, but her posture was upright, controlled, a woman determined not to be reduced to helplessness by circumstance. She was tall, nearly Jack's height when standing, though slimmer, her long frame spare rather than delicate. Firelight brought warmth back into her skin, revealing the faint freckles along her cheeks and nose, and when she pushed loose strands of auburn hair behind her ear, her movements were careful but not timid. There was strength there, Jack noted again, the kind built from repetition rather than display. Ranger lay at her side, close enough that his flank brushed the couch, his broad head resting on his paws, amber eyes open and watchful. The German shepherd's body was relaxed in posture, but not in purpose. He tracked Emily's smallest movements, the rise and fall of her breath, the tightening of her fingers when pain flared, the subtle shifts that spoke louder to an animal than words ever could. Ranger was 5 years old, fully grown, his black and tan coat thick and healthy, a faint scar crossing one ear from a fight long before Jack had found him. He did not growl, did not bare teeth. Instead, he observed, the way Jack observed, as if both were quietly asking the same question. "Who are you, really?" Jack approached the couch and knelt, replacing the cooling compress at Emily's ankle with a warm wrap, his hands firm but gentle. His face, illuminated by the fire, showed the angular lines of a man shaped by hard choices. His beard was dark and uneven, flecked with gray, his jaw strong and uncompromising, his eyes sharp beneath heavy brows. He spoke little as he worked, and when he did, it was only to ask what mattered. "How's the pain?" "Manageable," Emily replied. Her voice was steady, though a muscle jumped in her cheek as the heat touched the injury. You've done this before." Jack didn't look up. "Enough times." She studied him openly now, perhaps realizing that observation was a language he respected. "You were military," she said, not asking. "Yes." "Combat?" "Yes." She nodded, absorbing that without comment. Silence followed, not awkward, but charged, like a wire drawn tight between them. Outside, wind slammed against the cabin, snow rattling against the small windows like thrown gravel. Emily broke the quiet. "You think the trap was meant for me?" Jack finally met her eyes. "No." She frowned slightly. "I think it was meant for something else," he continued, "and you stepped into it anyway." Her shoulders eased a fraction, relief or disappointment he couldn't tell. "Then why look at me like that?" "Because someone said it," Jack said evenly, "and you're the only other human I've seen out there." Emily let out a slow breath. "Fair." She shifted, wincing, then steadied herself. "I didn't know about the trap. I swear that part." Jack nodded once. He believed her about that too. What he didn't believe was the rest of the story she wasn't telling. He rose and moved toward the table, retrieving her pack where he'd left it open. He didn't rummage further. He didn't need to. The image of the equipment inside was already burned into his mind. "Environmental research," he said, more statement than question. "Yes." "Funded by who?" Emily's gaze drifted to the fire. The flames reflected in her eyes, bright and restless. "A private organization." Jack waited. Silence was a tool he used well. "They assess land use," she added finally. "Impact, viability." "For what purpose?" She hesitated just long enough for him to notice. "Development." There it was. The word settled between them like ash. Jack felt something old and sharp twist in his chest, not anger exactly, but recognition. He had seen this pattern before, years ago, when logging companies pushed lines deeper into places that should have been left alone, when men in clean jackets talked about progress while the land paid the price. "And the traps?" he asked quietly. Emily's jaw tightened. "Not part of my assignment." Jack studied her, weighing the tension in her posture, the way her hands clenched and unclenched against the blanket. She wasn't lying outright, but she wasn't telling the whole truth either. He'd lived long enough to know the difference. Ranger shifted, lifting his head and moving closer, his nose brushing Emily's knee lightly, then her hand. She startled at first, then relaxed, her fingers curling instinctively into the thick fur at his neck. The dog allowed it, leaning in just slightly, a silent test. "You don't trust me," Emily said softly, more observation than complaint. "No," Jack replied, "I don't." She nodded, accepting that with unexpected calm. "That's fair, too." Another gust of wind shook the cabin, and somewhere outside, a tree cracked under the weight of snow. Emily flinched despite herself. Jack noticed. Fear, real fear this time, flickered across her face. "Who else knows you're here?" he asked. Emily hesitated, then answered carefully. "No one exact. I was supposed to check in tonight." "Did you?" "No." Jack's expression hardened. That meant someone would come looking. Or worse, someone already was. He moved to the window, peering out into the white darkness, scanning for lights, movement, anything out of place. He saw nothing but snow and trees, but the unease did not lift. The trap, the equipment, the storm, it all pointed toward something coiled and waiting just beyond sight. Behind him, Emily shifted again, grimacing as pain flared. Ranger responded instantly, pressing his weight gently against her leg, careful of the injury, offering warmth and grounding. She exhaled shakily, surprise softening her features. "He's not just a guard dog," she said quietly. "No," Jack agreed. "He's not." For the first time, a faint smile touched her mouth, small and genuine, before fading again under the weight of circumstance. "I didn't mean for any of this," she said. "I came to observe, to document, that's all." Jack turned back to her. "Observation still leaves footprints." The words landed harder than he'd intended, but he didn't take them back. Some truths were better spoken early. The fire crackled, sending sparks snapping upward. The cabin felt smaller now, holding not just warmth, but tension, questions pressing against its walls. Jack realized he had crossed an invisible line the moment he carried Emily inside. Whatever she represented, whatever force had placed that trap in the forest, was now tied to him, to Ranger, to this place he had chosen as refuge. Emily met his gaze, her green eyes steady despite pain and fear. "If you're asking whether I care what happens to this forest," she said, "the answer is yes." Jack studied her for a long moment, then looked away. Caring, he knew, was not the same as choosing to protect. Outside, the storm continued its relentless assault, and somewhere beyond the curtain of snow, unseen intentions moved closer. Inside the cabin, suspicion took root, not as an accusation, but as a necessary guard, settling between Jack Turner and Emily Brooks, waiting to see which of them would break first. Morning arrived without ceremony, a thin gray light seeping through the frost-laced windows and settling over the cabin like a held breath. The storm had loosened its grip during the night, leaving behind a world muffled and altered, the forest bent under fresh weight. Jack Turner rose before the fire cooled, habit pulling him upright long before his body wanted to follow. He moved quietly, boots in hand, careful not to wake Emily Brooks, who slept fitfully on the couch, her face pale but no longer blue with cold. Ranger lay curled near her feet, his large frame blocking the narrow path between couch and door, ears twitching at every shift of air, awake even while resting. Jack watched them for a moment, the dog's protective posture, the woman's tightened brow even in sleep, and felt the uneasy certainty deepen. Whatever truth Emily carried, it was already pressing against the walls of his life. Emily woke later, not with a start, but slowly, as if surfacing through layers of pain and memory. Her green eyes focused, adjusted, and then found Jack at the table, sharpening a knife with steady strokes. The sound was soft, rhythmic, not threatening, but deliberate. She shifted, testing her ankle with a small, controlled movement, and winced despite herself. Jack noticed immediately. "Don't," he said without looking up. She exhaled through her nose, a breath caught between irritation and gratitude. "Still hurts," she admitted. "It should," Jack replied. "You were caught in a steel trap." She managed a thin smile. "I've had worse mornings." Ranger lifted his head at her voice and patted closer, sniffing her hand before settling again, his weight reassuring, warm. Emily's fingers threaded into his fur without thinking, and the dog allowed it, eyes half-lidded but aware. She looked older this morning, Jack thought. Not in years, but in honesty. Pain had stripped something performative away, leaving behind the shape of who she actually was, tall and lean, shoulders squared despite injury, auburn hair pulled back loosely, skin marked by weather rather than cosmetics. She looked like a woman accustomed to field work and long days, not comfort. Jack set the knife down. "We need to talk." She nodded. "I know." He stood and crossed the room, retrieving her pack from the shelf where he had placed it the night before. He set it on the table between them and unzipped it fully this time. Emily watched without protest, her jaw tightening, hands clenched in the blanket. Inside were the things Jack had seen already, and more, folded maps laminated against moisture, each marked with precise symbols, small orange flags bundled together, a compact drone, its casing scuffed from use, and a sealed envelope stamped with a corporate logo she did not name yet. Jack spread the maps out, his eyes tracing the markings with the practiced attention of someone who read terrain the way others read books. "These aren't animal migration routes," he said quietly. Emily closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them again. "No. They're access points," Jack continued, "old roads, logging spurs, and these," he tapped several red X's, "are trap sites." Her shoulders sagged, the fight leaving her posture. "Yes?" Jack waited. Silence stretched, heavy, but not cruel. Outside, a branch cracked under melting snow. Ranger shifted, sensing the change in the room, his gaze moving from Jack to Emily and back again. "I work for Northridge Solutions," Emily said finally. "Private Environmental Risk Assessment." Jack's expression did not change, but something inside him locked into place. "That's a clean name." "It's meant to be," she replied, bitter humor flickering across her face. "We're hired by development firms to evaluate land. Officially, it's about safety, wildlife behavior, risk to workers. Unofficially," she trailed off. "Unblocking paths," Jack finished. Emily nodded. "Yes." She told him then, the words coming faster now, as if once the dam broke there was no point in holding back. Northridge placed test traps, motion sensors, temporary markers, all designed to provoke animal responses and collect data. The goal was to map resistance, to predict conflict, to smooth the way for extraction. The trap that caught her ankle had been part of a controlled placement, set by a subcontractor days earlier, its location logged, its risk assessed on paper. It was never meant to hold a person. "It was supposed to be monitored," she said, her voice tight. "Someone was supposed to retrieve it after the data window closed. They didn't." Jack's jaw flexed. "Because they didn't care." Emily flinched. "Because they assumed nothing would go wrong." Jack looked down at the map again, at the red X's scattered like wounds across the forest he had come to love as fiercely as any living thing. Anger rose, sharp and controlled, the kind that did not shout. "You knew this was protected land." "Yes." "And you came anyway." "Yes." Ranger let out a low sound, not a growl, but a breath that vibrated with unease. Emily's hand tightened in his fur as if seeking grounding. "I told myself it was better if I was there," she said, voice cracking now, "that I could minimize harm, that I could report honestly." She laughed once, quietly, without humor. "But the truth is, the system doesn't reward honesty. It rewards clearance." Jack thought of the trap's clean metal, the precision of its placement. He thought of the blood on the snow. "And it rewarded you." Emily met his gaze. "Until it didn't." She explained how she had been mapping routes when she heard movement, how she'd stepped off the packed trail to investigate, how the jaws had closed before she even registered the danger. She did not dramatize it. She did not soften it. The trap had done exactly what it was designed to do. "I became the data point," she said softly. Jack folded the maps back up, his movements careful, controlled. "You're lucky Ranger heard you." "I know." Her eyes flicked to the dog. "I don't think I'd still be alive otherwise." Ranger met her gaze, ears forward, then leaned into her knee gently, as if acknowledging the truth without judgment. "Who else knows you're here?" Jack asked again. Emily hesitated. "My supervisor. He's not local." "What's his name?" "Caleb Moore." The name meant nothing to Jack yet, but the way she said it did. Caleb Moore, Emily explained, was in his early 40s, clean-cut, efficient, with a way of speaking that sounded supportive while quietly closing doors. He believed in metrics more than people, progress more than process. He had signed off on the trap placements. "If he realizes you've gone dark," Jack said, "he'll send someone." "Yes." Jack nodded slowly. "Then this isn't over." Emily swallowed. "No." Outside, the day brightened, sunlight breaking through clouds and setting the snow ablaze in harsh white. The forest looked innocent in that light, almost forgiving. Jack knew better. He had seen what happened when powerful interests decided a place was expendable. He had walked away once after the army, thinking isolation was enough to keep him out of other people's wars. "You understand what you brought here," he said, not accusing but stating fact. "Yes," Emily replied, "and I'm sorry." Jack studied her for a long moment. He saw guilt there, real and corrosive, not the kind worn for sympathy. He also saw resolve, a hardening that came when a line had been crossed and could not be uncrossed. "What do you want now?" he asked. He hung. She answered without hesitation. To stop it. The words landed heavily, but they rang true. Ranger rose then, standing between them, tail low but relaxed, eyes moving from Jack to Emily as if awaiting a decision. Jack felt the old weight of command settle on his shoulders, the familiar knowledge that choosing nothing was still a choice. "Rest," he said finally. "You're not going anywhere today." Emily nodded, relief and fear tangling in her expression. Jack gathered the maps and sealed them back into her pack, not returning it to the shelf, but setting it beside the door instead. A small, deliberate shift. Outside, the forest waited, unchanged and yet irrevocably altered by what had been revealed within the cabin. The truth had come out, sharp and cold as the steel trap itself, and like any wound, it would take more than time to heal. Snow fell again that night, not with the violence of the earlier storm, but with a patient persistence that softened edges and buried tracks, as if the forest itself were trying to erase the evidence of what humans brought into it. Emily Brooks lay awake on the couch, the fire breathing slow warmth into the room, her injured ankle pulsing with a dull, rhythmic ache that no longer demanded her full attention. Pain, she realized, was easier to manage than guilt. The cabin was quiet except for the occasional creak of settling logs and the steady sound of Ranger's breathing at her feet. The German shepherd had not left her side since morning, not once. He shifted when she shifted, lifted his head when she sighed, and when she reached down unconsciously, his fur was always there, solid and real beneath her fingers. Ranger was 5 years old, heavy-boned and strong, his black and tan coat thick enough to hold the heat of the fire long after he moved away, though he never did. His eyes, amber and intelligent, watched her without accusation, and that, Emily found, was somehow worse. Jack Turner moved through the cabin with the economy of someone used to making himself small in dangerous places. He spoke little, chopped wood when the stove asked for it, and checked the windows and door with the same quiet regularity he once checked perimeters. In the firelight, his angular face looked carved from shadow and resolve, beard rough, jaw set, eyes sharp, even when his posture appeared relaxed. The war had shaped him in ways Emily recognized now with uncomfortable clarity. He was not a man who drifted into moral questions. He stood in them until they resolved, one way or another. Watching him, she felt the weight of her own hesitation press harder. The days that followed blurred into a slow rhythm dictated by weather and recovery. Snow deepened outside, sealing the cabin into a small island of warmth and uneasy truce. Emily's ankle improved enough that she could sit upright for longer stretches, then stand briefly with Jack's help. He fashioned a crude but effective brace from scavenged wood and straps, adjusting it without comment until it fit her leg as naturally as if it had always belonged there. Ranger supervised closely, nose pressed near her knee, ears flicking at every sound, as if memorizing her limits. At night, when the wind rose and the forest sang its hollow songs, Emily's thoughts circled relentlessly. She replayed the words she had said to Jack, the truths she had confessed, and the ones she still held back, not out of malice, but fear. Northridge Solutions had trained her well. The company specialized in compartmentalization data here, ethics there, responsibility always shifted upward or outward. Emily had entered the field believing she could make a difference from inside the system, believing that careful reports and honest numbers could slow the machinery of extraction. Instead, she had watched those numbers get polished, reframed, turned into permission slips. The trap in her ankle was not an accident. It was the logical end of a process that reduced living systems to variables. Ranger rose one evening and padded to the door, nose lifting, ears angling toward the dark. Emily noticed the shift immediately. "He hears something," she said softly. Jack nodded, already moving. He took the rifle from its hooks by the door, a practical tool rather than a threat, and cracked the door just enough to scan the snow-silvered clearing. No lights, no engines, nothing but falling flakes and the distant snap of ice-laden branches. Ranger stood between Jack and Emily without instruction, body broad and calm, a living barrier. The dog did not bark. He did not need to. When the door closed again, the tension lingered. Emily realized then that Ranger was not forgiving her, but he was not condemning her either. His loyalty was not blind. It was conditional, rooted in the present moment. You are here. You are injured. You are part of the pack for now. It was a standard more honest than anything her company had ever offered. Later, when the fire burned low and Jack stepped outside to check the generator, Emily sat alone with Ranger. The dog's head rested on her uninjured knee, his weight heavy and grounding. She spoke to him quietly, not expecting answers, only relief. "I thought I was helping," she whispered. "I thought if I was there, I could steer things." Ranger lifted his head slightly, eyes steady. She almost laughed at herself. Even the dog knew better. Her phone had no signal, but the satellite communicator lay within reach, silent and accusatory. Emily had not turned it on since arriving. Every hour she delayed was another hour before Northridge realized she had gone dark. She knew Caleb Moore's patience was measured in metrics, not mercy. Caleb was a tall, meticulously groomed man with close-cropped hair and a smile that never reached his eyes. A man who spoke of outcomes the way others spoke of weather, inevitable and impersonal. He would send someone, maybe more than one. The choice formed slowly, like frost creeping along glass. Emily could leave when the snow eased, report what had happened in the language Northridge understood, liability, deviation, mitigation, and watch as the machine corrected itself and rolled on. Or she could do something else entirely, something that would cost her more than a job. She chose the latter on a night when the snow fell so thick the world beyond the windows ceased to exist. Jack sat across from her at the table, repairing a torn glove, Ranger asleep between them. Emily took a breath that felt like stepping off a ledge. "I want to stop this," she said. Jack did not look up. "I know. I mean really stop it," she continued. "Not delay it, not soften the language." His hands paused. "That has consequences." "Yes. Not just for you." Emily met his eyes. "I know that too." She explained her plan in quiet, careful terms. She had access to internal files, placement logs, subcontractor records. If she transmitted them to the right agencies, state wildlife enforcement, federal land management, there would be investigations. Real ones. Northridge would deny, deflect, threaten. Her career in private consulting would be over. She would be labeled a liability, a traitor to the industry, but the traps would be documented, the routes exposed. The forest would have a chance. Jack listened without interruption. When she finished, the cabin seemed to hold its breath. Ranger lifted his head, ears twitching, sensing the shift in the air. "You'll need proof," Jack said finally, "not just files." "I know," Emily replied, "and I know where to get it." The maps were still in her pack, every red X a confession. She would have to guide investigators to the sites. She would have to stand by her testimony when Northridge pushed back. She would have to live with the knowledge that some damage could not be undone. Jack nodded once. "Then rest," he said. "Tomorrow, we plan." Relief and fear washed through her in equal measure. Ranger rose and moved closer, pressing his side against her leg, warm and steady. He did not wag his tail. He did not lick her face. He simply stayed. That night, as the fire died down and the snow continued its quiet work outside, Emily realized the forest had become something she had not expected, not an asset, not a case study, but a living home guarded by a man who had already given enough and a dog who understood loyalty better than most people. She had come here to measure impact. She would leave, when she left at all, changed by it. And whatever came next, investigations, confrontations, consequences, she would face them knowing that choosing conscience over profit was not a gesture. It was a commitment, one that did not ask for forgiveness, only courage. The sound came first as a vibration more than a noise, a low mechanical thrum that traveled through the frozen ground and up into Jack Turner's bones, waking instincts he had tried to leave behind with his uniform. Ranger was on his feet before Jack reached the window. the German shepherd's body snapping from rest to readiness, ears pricked forward, tail stiff but controlled. Snow lay thick across the clearing, moonlight turning it into a hard, pale mirror, and beyond the tree line a pair of headlights cut through the forest, then vanished, then reappeared as the vehicle crept closer on a track no one used unless they knew it existed. Emily Brooks sat upright on the couch, brace secured, pain forgotten as recognition dawned. "They found me," she said quietly, and in her voice there was no panic, only the finality of a consequence arriving on time. Jack did not ask how she knew. He had learned long ago that people who worked inside systems developed an ear for their footsteps. He took the rifle from its hooks and set it aside within reach without chambering around, a deliberate choice. His face was calm, angular lines set, beard shadowing a jaw that had clenched through worse nights than this. "Stay back," he told Emily, not unkindly, then glanced down at Ranger. "Watch." The dog moved instantly, placing himself between Emily and the door, his broad frame a promise and a warning. Ranger was 5, heavy-muscled and balanced, his black and tan coat silvered with age along the muzzle, amber eyes steady and unblinking. He did not bark. He did not need to. The engine cut. Doors opened. Voices followed, muffled by snow and distance, confident in the way of men who believed authority traveled with them. Jack stepped onto the porch, boots sinking into drifts, cold biting through his coat. 3 figures emerged from the trees, their breath steaming. The first was Caleb Moore. Emily had described him accurately. Early 40s, tall and narrow-shouldered, hair clipped close and styled even for the field, a clean-shaven face that seemed permanently arranged into something between reassurance and appraisal. He wore a tailored winter coat that did not belong in the woods, boots too new, eyes too quick. Behind him came 2 contractors, men built thick and practical, faces weathered, beards rimmed with frost, eyes scanning the ground rather than Jack's face. They carried equipment cases and a familiarity with intrusion. "Jack Turner," Caleb called, smiling as if greeting a client rather than a boundary. "We appreciate you stepping out. We're here to retrieve company property and resolve a misunderstanding." Jack did not move from the top step. "You're trespassing," he said evenly. Caleb's smile thinned, but he kept his tone smooth. "We have permits pending. There's been an incident involving our employee. We're authorized to collect data to ensure safety." Behind Jack, Ranger's low breath carried through the open door, a presence Caleb noticed despite himself. His gaze flicked inward, calculation sharpening. "Emily," he called, "you don't need to complicate this. Accidents happen. We can take you home." Emily rose with effort, gripping the back of the chair until her knuckles whitened. She was tall, lean, auburn hair pulled back, skin pale in the lamplight, eyes steady now with a resolve that surprised even her. She did not step outside. She did not need to. "You're not authorized to be here," she said, voice clear. "And you know it." Caleb sighed as if disappointed. "You're injured. You're emotional. Let's not make permanent decisions based on temporary stress." Jack felt the old heat rise, but he kept it contained. "You'll leave," he said. "Now." Caleb's gaze hardened. "This doesn't concern you." "It does," Jack replied. "Everything on this land does." Snow crunched as one of the contractors shifted his weight, eyes narrowing toward the door. Ranger stepped forward, not aggressively, simply closing the distance with a quiet inevitability that made the man stop. The dog's presence filled the threshold, a living line no one crossed lightly. Caleb recalibrated, lowering his voice. "Emily, listen to me. If you transmit anything, you burn every bridge you've built. No one hires whistleblowers. You know that." Emily's chest tightened, the truth of it pressing hard. She thought of years spent collecting data, of reports edited down to what clients wanted, of the way success had always been framed as efficiency. She thought of the steel jaws closing around her ankle, of blood on snow, of Ranger's warmth when she could not feel her toes. "I know," she said. "And you'll still do it?" "Yes." The word rang out into the cold, and for a heartbeat the forest seemed to listen. Caleb's face closed. "Then you leave us no choice." Jack raised a hand slightly, palm open. "Your choice is to walk away." Caleb laughed softly, humorless. "You don't understand how this works." "I do," Jack said. "I've seen men push lines they couldn't hold." Caleb nodded to the contractors. One stepped forward, lifting a case. "We'll retrieve the traps and logs," he said, voice rough. "No harm done." "No," Emily said, and reached for the satellite communicator on the table. Her fingers trembled once, then steadied. Ranger shifted, pressing closer to her leg, grounding her. She activated the device, its screen lighting the room. "I'm transmitting now." Caleb took a step, then stopped as Jack's gaze hardened. Not anger, certainty, the kind that ended conversations. The contractor hesitated, reading the room, reading the dog, reading the man who did not bluff. "Emily," Caleb said quietly, "think about your future." She looked past him, through the open door, at the trees bending under snow, at a place that had never been hers, yet had shown her a truth she could not unsee. "I am," she replied, and sent the files. Minutes stretched. The communicator chirped confirmation. Data gone, records copied, coordinates shared, the trap placements logged, the price of truth paid forward. Caleb's shoulders dropped a fraction. He turned to Jack, eyes cold. "You just made enemies." Jack nodded once. "I've had worse." Sirens came later, distant at first, then closer, blue light washing the snow in brief, unreal color. A pair of trucks arrived, state wildlife officers and a federal land agent, faces drawn, movements precise. The lead officer, a woman in her late 30s with wind-chapped skin and a practical braid tucked into her collar, introduced herself as Agent Laura Finch. She was compact, efficient, eyes sharp behind clear lenses, a demeanor forged by years of being ignored until facts forced attention. She took in the scene quickly. The men, the equipment, the dog, the injured woman. "We've been tracking illegal placements," she said. "This fills in the gaps." Caleb protested, smoothly, predictably. Laura Finch listened, then cut him off with a raised finger and a flat look. "You can speak to counsel," she said. "For now, you're done here." The contractors complied first, relief written in their shoulders. Caleb lingered a moment, eyes on Emily, then turned away, anger contained and catalogued for later. When the trucks pulled back into the forest, the clearing fell quiet again, snow drifting down to soften footprints. Emily sagged into the chair, breath shuddering out of her. Jack closed the door and leaned against it for a moment, the weight of the night settling into his muscles. Ranger moved to Emily and nudged her hand with his nose, then sat, close and steady. "You okay?" Jack asked. She nodded, tears slipping free despite herself. "I will be." Outside, the forest held its silence, altered not by victory but by exposure. The truth had been spoken. It had cost her a career and earned her something harder to name. As the fire crackled and the snow continued its patient fall, Jack understood that some lines, once crossed, did not lead back. They led forward into consequences borne with open eyes. Spring did not arrive in White Pine National Forest all at once. It crept in cautiously, like an animal testing the air after a long winter, loosening the snow a little each day, letting water run again beneath the ice. The forest breathed differently now. Branches shed their white burden in slow, rhythmic drops, and the ground revealed dark veins of earth where life waited, patient and stubborn. Jack Turner stood at the edge of a half-rebuilt fence line, hammer resting against his thigh, watching steam rise from the thawing soil. His movements were steady, practiced, the same careful economy that had carried him through war and solitude alike. But something in him had shifted. The tightness he had worn like armor for years had begun, almost imperceptibly, to ease. Ranger lay nearby, stretched out on the damp ground, his black and tan coat flecked with melting snow and mud. At 5 years old, he was still powerful, still alert, but there was a new ease in the way he rested, one eye half closed, the other tracking Jack with quiet devotion. His ears flicked at the sound of distant water, at birds daring to return, at the subtle changes that told him the world was turning again. He had learned this rhythm from the land and from the man beside him. The investigations had come and gone in waves. Wildlife officers, federal agents, and environmental auditors had moved through White Pine with clipboards and cameras, their boots carving temporary scars into trails that healed quickly under snowmelt. Illegal traps were cataloged and removed. Subcontractors vanished from the edges of maps. Boundaries were redrawn and reinforced, not with fences alone, but with attention. The forest had become visible in a way it had not been before. Jack had answered questions when asked, nothing more, nothing less. He did not seek credit. He had never learned how to want it. He was replacing a rotted post when Ranger's head lifted sharply. The dog rose in one fluid motion, tail lifting, body angling toward the old access road. Jack followed the line of his gaze and felt something stir, cautious but curious. A truck approached slowly, its engine uneven, tired but determined. The sound of a vehicle that had lived a long life and refused to quit. It was not the sleek intrusion of corporate presence, not the official rumble of government trucks. It was familiar in its humility. The blue pickup came into view, paint dulled and chipped, bed patched with mismatched boards and rope. It stopped at a respectful distance, tires sinking slightly into the soft ground. The door opened, and Emily Brooks stepped out. She looked different, not transformed into someone else, but stripped of what no longer fit. She wore worn denim tucked into scuffed hiking boots, their laces stained with mud. A charcoal gray sweater hugged her lean frame, practical and warm, and her auburn hair was pulled back into a loose ponytail that frayed at the edges. Her skin was sun-warmed rather than pale, freckled and unadorned, her face marked by fatigue and resolve rather than pain. She stood carefully, favoring her ankle slightly, but she stood on her own. For a moment, no one spoke. Ranger broke the silence first. The German shepherd bounded forward, joy exploding from him in a way Jack had not seen since the dog was a pup. He crossed the clearing in seconds, paws splashing through shallow meltwater, tail wagging so hard it threw his balance off. Emily barely had time to brace before Ranger reached her, circling, nudging, pressing his broad head into her hands with a whine that sounded suspiciously like relief. She laughed, the sound breaking free unguarded, and dropped to one knee despite the mud, wrapping her arms around his neck. Tears came then, warm and honest, streaking her cheeks as Ranger licked at her face, forgiving her in the only language he knew. Jack watched, hammer slipping from his hand into the dirt. Something loosened in his chest, slow and unfamiliar, like ice cracking under the first strong sun. He walked toward them, steps measured, shoulders still squared out of habit. Up close he saw the changes in Emily more clearly, the steadiness in her eyes, the absence of calculation, the way she met his gaze without flinching. "You shouldn't kneel in that," he said, voice rougher than he intended. Emily smiled up at him, mud on her jeans, hair coming loose. "I'll survive." Ranger finally broke away, darting a few steps back, then returning with a bright red rubber ball clutched proudly in his jaws. The ball was scuffed now, marked by teeth and earth, but unmistakable. He dropped it into Emily's lap and nudged it insistently, tail sweeping arcs in the air. She laughed through tears and picked it up. "I was hoping he'd remember." Jack nodded slowly. "He doesn't forget much." They stood there a moment longer, the three of them, the forest humming softly around them. Then Jack gestured toward the cabin. "Come inside. You'll freeze." Inside, the cabin looked much the same and yet different. The fire burned low, but steady. The shelves were fuller now, not just with supplies, but with small signs of life returning. A potted pine sapling by the window, a stack of new field guides left by the agents, a coil of rope ready for work rather than defense. Emily took it in quietly, respect evident in the way she moved, careful not to impose. "I didn't come to talk about money," she said after a moment, as if anticipating the question. Jack studied her, then nodded. "Good." She told him what had happened after she left. Northridge Solutions had cut ties swiftly, publicly citing protocol violations. The industry closed ranks as expected. But something else had happened too. State agencies moved faster with the data she provided. A conservation nonprofit reached out, not with polished offers, but with boots-on-the-ground work. Emily had taken it. Field surveys, restoration projects, real accountability, even when it hurt. "I'm here as a volunteer," she said simply. "If you'll have me." Jack looked at Ranger, who thumped his tail against the floor as if voting in favor. Jack's mouth twitched, the ghost of a smile. White Pine could use the help. They spent the afternoon walking the lower trails, Ranger weaving between them, occasionally stopping to sniff new growth pushing through the thaw. Emily moved carefully, testing her ankle, listening when Jack warned of soft ground. She asked questions, not to extract information, but to understand. Jack answered when it mattered. Silence filled the rest, comfortable now rather than charged. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the snow-mottled forest floor, Jack felt something he had not allowed himself in years, a sense of continuity. The forest was not just a place to hide anymore. It was a place where damage had been named and tended, where choices had consequences that did not always end in loss. When Emily prepared to leave for the night, Jack walked her to the truck. Ranger sat between them, the red ball at his feet like a token of shared history. "You can come back," Jack said. "I know," Emily replied. "I will." She drove away slowly, the old truck coughing and then settling into a steady rhythm as it disappeared down the road. Jack stood until the sound faded, then turned back toward the cabin. Ranger trotted ahead, confident, tail high. Beyond the trees, water ran free again, carving new paths through old ground. Jack followed Ranger's tracks back inside, noticing how the dog's prints overlapped his own. New footprints marked the thawing snow, not as scars, but as signs of passage. And for the first time in a long while, Jack Turner understood that starting over did not mean forgetting the past. It meant choosing, day by day, to walk forward anyway. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with thunder or blinding light. Sometimes they come quietly, on 4 steady paws, in the courage to tell the truth when silence would be safer, or in the moment a wounded heart chooses to protect instead of turn away. In the depths of White Pine, it wasn't strength alone that changed everything. It was conscience, forgiveness, and a love placed gently by God into ordinary lives. God often works through small obediences. A man who refuses to abandon what is right, a woman who chooses honesty over comfort, a loyal dog who stays when others might flee. These are the miracles we miss when we only look for spectacle. Yet they are the ones that heal forests, families, and souls, one choice at a time. In our daily lives, we all face moments like this. A chance to speak truth, to protect what cannot protect itself, to walk forward even when the path costs us something. May this story remind us that God is near in those moments, guiding our steps even when the snow feels deep and the way forward uncertain. If this story touched your heart, please consider sharing it with someone who might need hope today. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from, or what part of the story spoke to you most. And subscribe to the channel so we can continue telling stories that shine a little more light into a world that needs it. May God bless you and your family. May He walk beside you through every storm. And may you always find the courage to choose truth, kindness, and faith, because even the smallest step can become a miracle in His hands.